Alexandria, 3rd century before Christ, a city where power did not come from the army, but from what was written. Alexandria did not emerge by chance. It was conceived as a project. Founded at a strategic point of the Mediterranean, the city was designed to connect worlds, maritime routes, commercial routes, cultural routes. From the beginning, Alexandria was built to receive ships, people, ideas. While other cities grew around temples or fortresses, Alexandria grew around knowledge. The Ptolemaic rulers understood something rare for their time. Military power conquers territory, but intellectual power shapes generations. From this understanding, the Library of Alexandria was born, not as a single isolated building, but as part of an institutional system, a project without precedent. The goal was not merely to preserve Greek knowledge, it was to gather everything that could be known. Texts from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from Persia, from the Hebrew world, from India. Everything was to be brought, translated, compared, organized. The library functioned as a center of absorption. Nothing was too small, nothing too insignificant. Every ship arriving at the harbor was inspected. If it carried books or papyrus scrolls, they were collected. The originals were kept. Copies were returned to their owners. This was not an exception, it was policy. Knowledge ceased to be private. It became part of a state project. The library was connected to the Museion, an institution devoted to study. It did not merely train students, it formed thinkers. Scholars lived within the complex. They walked the same corridors, ate together, debated daily. They received sustenance, housing, time to observe, time to fail, time to think. This detail was essential. Deep thought requires continuity, and the library provided it. There, debates arose about the movement of celestial bodies, about the shape of the earth, about the circulation of blood, about mechanical principles, about the organization of human knowledge. Knowledge was not accumulated passively, it was questioned, confronted, revised. Texts were not merely copied, they were compared, corrected, annotated. Different versions of the same work were placed side by side. Discrepancies were examined, errors were debated. It was an environment of constant critique. But this entire system had a structural fragility. It depended on organic material, papyrus, sheets sensitive to moisture, to fire, to time. This required continuous maintenance, scribes, editors, careful storage. As long as political support remained, the system functioned. When priorities began to shift, failures appeared. The most famous story of the library's decline involves fire. During conflicts in Alexandria, ships were set ablaze in the harbor. The flames spread. For a long time, it was believed this episode destroyed the library entirely. But the records suggest something different. The library was never a single building. It was distributed, fragmented across multiple spaces. The Great Library near the Royal Complex, the Serapeum serving as a secondary repository. Other smaller collections spread throughout the city. Even if part of the system was damaged, other parts continued to exist. What emerges from historical sources is not a sudden end, but a gradual weakening. As centuries passed, institutional support declined. Political changes altered priorities. Wars diverted resources. Scribes were no longer paid. Rooms stood empty. Texts ceased to be reproduced. Some scrolls were lost through neglect, others through deterioration, others simply through lack of interest. Not through a deliberate act, but through gradual abandonment. Knowledge was not destroyed en masse. It stopped being sustained. The library did not end in a single day. It dissolved over time. To understand this process, one must look at Alexandria itself. The city was built on unstable ground. Sandbanks, limestone platforms, land reclaimed from the sea. Over the years, the ground began to sink. Sediments accumulated, the sea advanced. Entire sections of the city disappeared. Streets, squares, buildings. What was once dry land came to exist beneath the water. Visible Alexandria changed. Invisible Alexandria remained. The city continued to be built upon itself. Greek layers, Roman layers, later layers, each period covering the one before. Beneath these layers, structures remained. Palaces tied to power collapsed. Temples disappeared. Entire neighborhoods sank. The library was associated with the political center of the city. It was not public. It was not peripheral. When the heart of Alexandria gave way, these structures went with it. This raises an important possibility. Papyrus does not survive fire, but it can endure when isolated from air. Flooded environments sealed by sediment can slow decomposition. Organic objects have remained intact for long periods under similar conditions. This does not guarantee the survival of the library's texts, but it suggests that not everything was necessarily destroyed. Across the centuries, buried structures remained where they fell. Empty rooms, forgotten repositories, silent spaces. What remains of the library may not be whole, may not be organized, may not be immediately recognizable, but fragments matter. A note, a commentary, a preserved name. Sometimes this is how knowledge returns. Not complete, but enough to change what we know. The Library of Alexandria represented something unique, a civilization that chose to invest in the systematic preservation of human thought. When this system unraveled, it was not merely a material loss, it was a break in continuity. Ideas stopped circulating, debates fell silent, intellectual paths were abandoned. The world moved forward, but along different routes. The library does not need to be rebuilt to matter. It needs to be understood, because what was lost was not only paper, it was time, it was continuity, it was possibility. Alexandria still holds this silence, beneath layers of earth, beneath water, beneath the city itself. The library did not vanish suddenly. It was gradually covered, little by little. And as long as these layers remain, this story will remain unfinished. Some stories end, others remain hidden, and this one is still waiting to be revealed.